Yes, indeed, the sun's still rising here over Parliament. You know, I've often joked about Cape Town, just saying, listen, I think people sometimes forget that the sun must rise, because it rises a lot later than it does in Johannesburg. But so lovely to be here. And on your screens, you can see the rising of the flag. And this is the raising of the flag ahead of the opening of Parliament. It's a tradition that happens within the parliamentary precinct as the State of the Nation address takes place today, and the opening of Parliament, the fifth democratic Parliament here of South Africa. So these are some live visuals that are taking place as we broadcast to you live on the morning before. And as you know, it's moved to the evening, and I think it was a much better move that people from all over South Africa finishing work, coming home, and are able to watch the President deliver the State of the Nation address. And a very important address, because this is an address that really speaks to the people of South Africa and what you can expect during the term of government, and laying out the foundation of the things that the government is going to be working on. And as Ayanda rightly pointed out, the economy is one of those issues that we certainly are looking forward to hearing about. But nonetheless, I think in the insert previously, as all systems are ready for this opening, we're going to see a very different Parliament this time around. We've got a lot more youth in there. There's a lot of young blood that's entering into Parliament. New faces, new parties, new opposition. And I think it's quite an interesting topic that we're going to be discussing with my guest that's joining me here in the SABC studios just outside of the parliamentary building. And this is Sanusha Naidu, who is a political analyst. Good to have you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's nice being here.
So, Parliament opening, the fifth democratically elected Parliament. We've been here in February. Here we are again, going through the motions, but a very different face that's going to be. Lots of new changes, lots of interesting things that we can expect. What are your feelings ahead of this opening?
Yeah, I mean, apart from the usual issues of what the State of the Nation address should be looking at and focusing on, and not just looking at a roadmap, but rather setting some concrete steps. I think it's also an interesting Parliament in terms of parties that have fell off and parties that have come in particular too. The National Freedom Party, which is the kind of splinter party from the IFP that did considerably well in the national election, and of course the EFF. And of course these are going to be very, I mean, I think the EFF for a long while has been one of those parties that has always been on the radar of everyone to say, what are they going to do in Parliament? I think they've shown when in the swearing in of their MPs the kind of identity they will bring to Parliament with the way they dress. I think those are some of the things that people will be looking at as they come up the red carpet this evening.
Indeed, it'll be interesting to see if they're going to be wearing their red overalls.
Exactly. And then of course I think the NFP is also a very interesting party, because here's a party that contested an election for the first time, a national election, even though it did really well at the local government election in 2011. So here's a party that's come in. Its leader has been been appointed Deputy Minister for Science and Technology, and it's going to be an interesting Parliament. And then of course there's a new parliamentary leader for the DA, which is Mmusi Maimane. You've got other political parties that have contracted over time and are not there. I think it's COPE and the PAC. So you've actually got a very different Parliament from what was in the fourth administration. And of course it's going to be a vibrant one as well.
A vibrant one, because a lot of people are expecting a lot from this Parliament, and especially when we heard that Julius Malema and the rest of the EFF representatives were going to be in Parliament, and I suppose offering quite vigorous debate within Parliament. I mean, this is expectations from people. Do you think it's going to be that way?
Well, I think the expectation is that the kind of vigorous debate you saw during the election campaign would probably translate itself into some kind of vigorous debate into Parliament. But I think Parliament is also about understanding the operation of how Parliament works, understanding national committees, understanding portfolio committees, understanding the debates and the kind of policy that you have to talk about. So the populism that you see outside may not necessarily find a space within the halls of Parliament. And that could be the kind of thing that people may not actually find in time that the EFF is able to continue to mete out as it continues to understand how Parliament works and how the legislature works.
Yeah, well, there you can see this was when they were all sworn in as parliamentary members, dressed in their overalls there, and it'll be interesting to see what happens today as well. I really want to talk about Zanele Magwazi-Msibi, the leader of the NFP. As you say, this is one of the new parties that are coming in, but at the same time, she is a deputy minister, as you've also rightly pointed out. What does that do for your position as, within Parliament, also part of an opposition party, but you're still within the ranks of a ministerial position? How does that affect you as an opposition leader?
It does necessarily mean that she's kind of like between two spheres. She's an opposition party, but she's also in government.
Yeah.
So it's on the one hand, she has to basically articulate, implement, and go forward on government policy. At the same time, she has to make sure that her party maintains its stance as an opposition party that holds government accountable on some of the legislature that it comes forward and in front of Parliament. And I think that's going to be a very interesting act. I think the last time we saw something like this as well was with other political parties that have been within the two spheres. Whether or not this will impact on the kind of effectiveness and efficacy that you want this party to be able to achieve in Parliament, it'll be interesting to see. There may be certain policies that they are very vocal on. In particular, I think I'm interested to look at how they address the traditional courts bill that supposedly should come to Parliament again, which is one of those bills that are actually hanging over from the fourth administration.
Yeah.
And it actually talks to some of the rural constituencies that would have probably voted for the NFP and some of the issues around rural women and the rights of rural women.
Yeah. Interesting again. Let's talk about women representation within Parliament, because we have our female Speaker of Parliament, Ms. Baleka Mbete, Zanele, who you have spoken about, and a lot of female ministers that are going to be represented, as well as party representatives, the EFF bringing a lot of female representation. Is this one of the biggest female representations we've had in our Parliament?
I'm not particularly sure, but I do think that it does bring certain flair to what they want to create in terms of gender parity, representation, in terms of representation in government structures and within the legislature. I think what's the key driver for me is how we resurrect some of the Chapter 9 institution in terms of the Gender Commission. How do we actually get these institutions around gender empowerment and gender-based policies effective? Because it's one thing having representation, but getting them to become effective in terms of pushing forward on gender policy is important.
It is very important. Well, the youth also being represented within Parliament, and not that Lindiwe Mazibuko was an older representation and a face for the Democratic Alliance, but we've got Musi Maimane coming in, both of them being very, very young. He is going to be interesting. Wrap up this conversation with your views on how Musi is going to represent himself in Parliament for the DA.
Well, let me just say, if we thought Lindiwe was a firebrand, I think we're seeing a firebrand in Musi even more.
Good.
I think he's articulate. He tries to tap onto the right issues. He talks about the right policy questions, and of course, he's very charismatic as a speaker, as a person, and it's actually quite interesting to see how he takes up his position as the parliamentary leader of the DA.
Sanusha Naidu, thank you very, very much for talking to us here on the program.
Thank you.
Quite interesting. This certainly is going to be an interesting sitting of Parliament, and new faces, new blood. And I suppose we had joked that the Parliamentary Channel was going to be one of the most watched channels. I don't think that's a joke. I think this is actually going to be quite serious. People are going to be tuning in for this interesting time in history. Let's take a